So for me, this conference, the Sufi Studies Symposium, was a very interesting and very professional academic conference that brought together not only professionals, academics, students and researchers in the field of Sufi studies and Islamic studies generally, but also practitioners, musicians and community that allowed for interesting conversations between the communities that are invested and interested in learning more about how academics study the field, but also academics learning more about how communities engage with these kinds of materials. And I think it was an excellent way to bring community and academic specialists together to experience what academia and professional studies can do for the larger fields and larger interests in Islamic studies and Sufi studies, history and religion more generally. So for me it was a very professional, very encouraging, very well-organized way of bringing these two communities together to think and discuss.
Okay. Maybe you can make some interpretations related to your topic.
Okay.
With the subject of the symposium. How do you relate it? And if this symposium brought something for you,
right.
What is that?
Right, okay. So my own interests in this field are largely in the study of religion in the late Ottoman period and the early Republican period. And so the project that I was working on was thinking about how Republican Turkish scholars thought about religion or discussed religion and how Sufism might have formed part of their interest. And so this for me showed me or demonstrated the importance of studying Sufism's long history in the Ottoman world, but also beyond the Ottoman world and Persian-speaking communities and the Arab world as well. So thinking about Sufism's centrality in the study of religion and the study of Islam has encouraged me, these presentations have encouraged me to think more long-term about my own project that is very specifically a modern historical project, but thinking about the way in which it connects to different geographies, different languages, and different time periods.
Our institute is very much related to the issue of methodology of Sufi studies.
Right.
And the connection with the other disciplines.
Right.
How do you see this issue?
So the issue of methodology in the study of any field, I think, is incredibly important and informs perhaps maybe the backbone of that discipline and allows it to speak to other disciplines and other subject areas. This symposium was interesting because it brought to the forefront what is the best or a shared methodology researchers in different fields, maybe in history or in religion, can draw on similarly together to discuss Sufism. And I think that the academic study of religion, especially in the American context, which is what I'm most familiar with, is still debating precisely what the best method is. Do we study texts? Do we study languages? Do we study practices? And in the symposium we saw all three of those areas brought together. So we had people studying poetry and the influence of poetry on Sufism. We saw people studying philosophical language and concepts within Sufism that were central and the shared ways in which they were engaged by Sufi scholars. We saw people studying Sufi practices, the history of Sufism in different places. So I think the methodology is very central to it, and I think what the Institute allows people to do is think together about what that methodology is. And I don't think there's an answer, but we need to find that answer together. And I think this kind of spaces allow us to have open discussions about the centrality of methodology in different disciplines.
Thank you. And I don't want to use this word, but what is your favorite paper or most benefited for you? Really?
Yeah, that's a good question. I enjoyed many of the papers. I thought the papers that focused very intimately on the poetry of particular individuals, maybe Kenan Rifai, for instance, was very illuminating. I learned a lot about the way the poetic vision of Kenan Rifai helped influence the kind of interest and engagement in Sufism and the effects that Sufism was able to have on large swaths of society. My favorite paper, though, I've really enjoyed the paper on Mahor Beste and Tanpınar's Sufi engagement. So interacting with concepts of Sufism in literature, I think, is a very interesting and very promising field of study. And so I've really enjoyed looking at literary concepts and engagement with Sufi concepts.
Oh, very nice answer. Did you listen to the paper yesterday related to Afghanistan, the one?
No, I missed the paper on Afghanistan. I came in right after it. But I thought the engagement with, for instance, India was very interesting as well. I mean, bringing all of these different historical traditions to a space like Istanbul to discuss them together is really a fascinating and illuminating project.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that it is not your first time to hear the name Kenan Rifai.
Right.
Your teacher, your advisor
Right.
is the professor of Kenan Rifai's distinguished professorship.
Right.
So how do you relate it? I mean, your advisor is that kind of
Right.
professor, and you learned more about Kenan Rifai here.
Right.
What can you say about all of these?
Yeah, so it's interesting for me because in the American context, the study of Sufism is frequently a very historical project, right? It's about studying early texts, early Sufis, and their influences on their communities into the present. But with the help of my advisor and this symposium, it's encouraged me to think about Sufism's contemporary place in modern Muslim societies. And I think that looking to Kenan Rifai as an exemplary figure in that study is probably very important, and I've been very encouraged by the symposium to take up that area of study in the future. Yeah, that's.
Thank you. Maybe the last question would be about the emphasis on Mahmut Erol Kılıç's talk. You remember he emphasized the importance of Ottoman period
Right.
For the study of Sufism.
Right.
So what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so Mahmut Erol Kılıç's talk at the beginning, his opening speech, was a very encouraging request that people focus more on the Ottoman context in our understandings of Sufism, because there's been a lot about Sufism and the language of Arabic and the language of Persian, but the language of Ottoman Turkish, or the Ottoman experience of Sufism, has often been ignored in scholarly studies. But Professor Kılıç's request that we engage more directly the centrality of the Ottoman Turkish historical experience with Sufism was very encouraging, and I think that it's a very promising area of study going forward.